The Boston Bruins have a number of unrestricted free agents to make decisions on. Let's talk about who stays and who goes.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Wednesday, June 5th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I'm a lifelong Bruins fan, been covering this team for various outlets for about 20 years now. Wrote about hockey full-time for 5 years for The Score and have been hosting this podcast since 2019. A number of off seasons in Don Sweeney's tenure in which he has had some decisions to make on unrestricted free agents of his own, as well as trying to attract some others. And the Bruins have quite a number to contend with this offseason. And we're going to discuss who's going to stay, who's going to walk, and also a bit of a caveat to end the podcast today. Let's talk about who goes first. That's probably the easiest place to start. And you have to look at the back end to get a good idea of where the Bruins are kind of pretty well set. Now, that comes with the opportunity to perhaps improve in the top four. But when you look at the depth chart at the moment and what they deployed in the postseason, their top six could be pretty set heading into the regular season. You have Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Carlo, Andrew Peeke, who was acquired prior to the trade deadline and has 2 years left on his contract. So he's established as a mainstay for the Bruins. You have Mason Lohrei, who's entering the final year of his entry-level contract, who proved himself more than worthy of a roster spot. And then Parker Wotherspoon, who emerged as a very reliable option as well. He's only making $800,000 next season. Among the unrestricted free agents, you have Derek Forbort, Matt Grzelcyk, and Kevin Shattenkirk. All three of these players are 30 and above, with Grzelcyk being the youngest at 30, Forbort 32, Shattenkirk 35. Forbort, he's had some moments with the Bruins. He's kind of a divisive player among the fan base. There's some that appreciate his heavy hitting, penalty killing efficiency. And there's some who just see him as kind of a passenger and not super effective in today's NHL. For me, and it's already been reported by the fourth period. Let's just have a sidebar here. When we're talking about free agency, trade rumors, and the like, I mentioned earlier that I worked for The Score for 5 years, and we would write up something as a report if it was corroborated by maybe one of a handful of insiders. You had your Bob McKenzie's back then before he retired, Darren Dreger, Pierre LeBrun, Elliot Friedman, Chris Johnston, maybe Frank Saravelli has jumped into that group as well. He is the president of the Hockey Writers Association. But there's some more minor insiders that we would wait on to see, again, if it was picked up by somebody else. So when I mention reports, take certain things with a grain of salt unless it's from like a major insider and, of course, from the team itself or an agent. At any rate, the fourth period saying that Derek Forbort is going to explore free agency I would expect Matt Grzelcyk will be allowed to walk as well. He did not play much in the postseason, found himself on the outside looking in. He has been a very good Bruin. He didn't quite turn into, Torrey Krug light, as many expected. Played in only 3 playoff games, had 11 points in 63 regular season games. There was some promise there, but at this stage in his career, the Bruins, I don't think, are going to be willing to even match what he was making at 3.6875, allowing him to look at opportunities elsewhere. Kevin Shattenkirk, same kind of thing. Perhaps he could stick around. He had a very manageable $1 million contract for the Bruins. He was one of those value signings, but very possible that he could look elsewhere if he sees an opportunity to get closer to the Stanley Cup than he might in Boston. Maybe he'll wait and see what the Bruins do in free agency before making a decision, but I would expect all 3 of those guys to be allowed to walk in free agency. Now, that's not to say the Bruins won't add at defense. You can't just go into the season with those 6 guys and then, rely on some of these younger guys in the AHL to step up in the event of injury. They will be looking to add some depth at that position. Certainly on the left side, where you just have Lindholm, Lohrei, and Witherspoon, you probably want a bit more depth there. Down the right side, they're pretty set with McAvoy, Carlo, and Peak, but you want to have some flexibility. You want to have some insurance in the case of injury. They probably will add a defenseman or 2. Do they swing big and add someone who can step into the top 4 so as not to throw Mason Lohrei right into the fire, although he certainly seems up to the task? Or do they add some more depth guys like a Witherspoon and see if they can get some value? That remains to be seen. But Forbort, Grzelcyk, Shattenkirk, I anticipate that they will go. Up front, unrestricted free agents, you have, Milan Lucic. We know he's not coming back. You have Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, Patrick Maroon, Jason Megna, and James Van Riemsdyk. I would expect them to allow Jason Megna to hit unrestricted free agency, with some decisions to make on DeBrusk, Heinen, Maroon, and Van Riemsdyk. And of that group, the most likely to go, I think, would be Maroon. I don't know if they want to. I mean, there is an appetite to keep him around. Same with James Van Riemsdyk. But it's whether or not they can, land bigger fishes, and if they have the space to accommodate those guys. So let's talk about these guys more specifically here as the podcast continues. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more with any winning $5 bet. So, for example, you visit FanDuel, you go to the NBA page, you see Game 1 of the NBA Finals between our Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks. The over-under is set at 214.5. Put $5 on either the over or the under. You hit on that, and you get $150 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. While you're on YouTube, check out Locked On Sports Today. All the latest news, opinions, and analysis from all over the Locked On universe. available free on YouTube and the Amazon Fire TV channels app. So we talked about some guys who are likely to go. The 3 defensemen, Forbort, Grzelcyk, Shattenkirk. Up front, maybe some more difficult decisions to be made. And let's start with Jake DeBrusk. Now, he's a guy that, if it were up to me, I would say he stays. But it's all a matter of what his value is to the Bruins and what a team would be willing to pay him. It seems as though the Bruins have drawn a bit of a line in the sand, and he may be willing to test free agency and see if he can get more elsewhere. Now, when it comes to his valuation, Dom Lucian of The Athletic wrote this morning that he values, or his model anyways, values DeBrusk at around $5.9 million per season. And he says, quote, he's a strong defensive player year over year, and the talent is there for him to be so much more offensively. He just doesn't show it consistently enough. And the issue, Dom continues, is that DeBrusk maybe just isn't a driver on his own. He can be a very strong secondary player, showed as much whenever he was with Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand, but offense was harder for him to create as a focal point. That's the kind of situation he needs to be in to thrive, and he looks to be a very worthy asset with that potential in mind. He isn't elite in one area. He does a lot of things really well, creating chances through shots and passes, forechecking, entering the zone, exiting the zone. He's a genuine top 6 player. Even when he's not scoring, he's still contributing without the puck, and that's worthwhile. His price tag of $5 or $6 million may cause some sticker shock, but he should be worth it. In the right situation, he could be worth well above that. He's young for a free agent, only 27, and he did lead the Bruins with 5 goals and 11 points during the playoffs. That's all according to Dom Lucian. For me, I'd be paying Jake DeBrusk $6 million this season. Easy. I'd go with that. Now, if he's pushing for 6.5, 7, that's a bit more than what you'd prefer. But for me, if he would sign a long-term deal, $6 million per season, then I am very much into that. And for me, I think he should stay. Perhaps he finds the grass isn't greener elsewhere. Maybe the Oilers are willing to pay him, and he goes and plays with Connor McDavid and turns into a Zach Hyman type kind of guy. But look at him as an example. The Leafs weren't willing to pay him, and he blew up elsewhere. You don't want that to happen. So I say keep Jake DeBrusk. Danton Heinen, same thing. And again, there's a report out there that the Bruins and Heinen have begun negotiating on a new contract. And this is what Dom at The Athletic has to say about Heinen. Still hard to believe that Heinen went all summer without receiving a contract last year. He showed exactly how silly that was with a strong year in Boston, earning 60% of the goals and chipping in 1.99 points per 60. 60% of the goals. I'm not really sure what that means, but some of that success came by way of earning ice next to David Pastrnak, but he can be trusted to play in the top 6 and hold his own. He's a solid third liner who should earn a contract much sooner this summer. And he's described as a guy with defensive upside, a savvy middle 6 ad that won't break the bank. They have him valued at around $3.6 million per season. That's probably a bit more than I would like to pay Danton Heinen. For me, Heinen should stay. I'd prefer to pay him closer to $2.5 million. But he's a guy for me that if I'm Don Sweeney, I keep around because A, you know that he's able to contribute. He was very patient last year, waiting around for a deal, and it paid off huge. Again, within reason, I would keep him around. I would say the same thing perhaps for James Van Riemsdyk. He had pretty good value on a $1 million contract last season, chipping in 11 goals, 27 assists for 38 points. He played in 11 games in the playoffs, 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points. Now he did, trail off a little bit, but that's to be expected perhaps at his age. And if you can sign him for around the same, $1 million, he's a good depth guy with some scoring punch to keep around. He's not the fastest guy in the world. I know they want to prioritize speed, so perhaps he is a guy that will go along with Pat Maroon. I mean, I said it at the time. If you're prioritizing speed in the lineup, then DeBrusk should be a guy you keep. Heinen as well to a certain extent. Maroon, Van Riemsdyk. I changed my mind on both of those guys. I would probably not keep them around. Now, you like their leadership, you like their veteran savvy, you like their experience, but the Bruins need to get younger and faster, and those guys don't really fit the bill. Now, there's a couple of guys who are unrestricted free agents in the minors, and that is Oscar Steen, who's 26, Anthony Richard, 27. Those guys are both unrestricted free agents as well. Richard had a bit of a taste up with the big club, 3 points in 9 games. Oscar Steen, he had a decent stint as well with, he only had 1 goal in 34 games this past season. With all forgiveness asked from Bruins fan Abby Pomeroy, he's probably a guy that you look to move on from. He just hasn't really cracked as a member of the Boston Bruins. So who stays? Please keep Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen. Pretty much everybody else you can let go. I would be tempted to keep Pat Maroon around just because he became a fan favorite, not an every night player. Perhaps he fills the role that you envisioned Lucic filling when he was signed last summer. Obviously, that did not work out. But he's a guy that I would keep around, perhaps as a guy that can rotate in and out on the fourth line, bring some energy, some physicality, some swagger to the team. He said, remember, he had the best experience of his career with this team, despite winning Stanley Cups with other teams. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Those are the guys that I would keep for sure. DeBrusk, Heinen, everybody else, including Kyle Kieser, who's a goaltender, I would probably allow to walk. Now, the last time the Bruins had significant cap space, it was kind of hit and miss, and we'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. All right, beware too much cap space and having too much freedom out there, because back in 2021, Don Sweeney went on a bit of a spending spree in free agency with mixed results. He gave Nick Foligno a contract that paid him $3.8 million against the cap. And even though he had a bounce back season in his second year, still way overvalued there. Eric Haula, he gave a 2-year, $4.75 million deal. I know there was a lot of people who at the time thought he belonged in the top 6. He drew comparisons to Charlie Coyle, but to be able to flip him for Pavel Zacha was the bigger win there. Thomas Nosek was signed, $1.75 million cap hit. Yeah, fine. Derek Forbort, that's when he signed his $3 million or 3-year, $3 million salary cap hit deal. Questionable as well. And then, of course, there was the 4-year, $20 million deal signed by Linus Ullmark, which was fantastic. Don Sweeney, at the moment, has upwards of $21 million in projected cap space to work with this offseason. Yes, they need to re-sign Jeremy Swayman. That is the huge priority, and that will take a good chunk of that cap space, perhaps even up to a third of it. You also have a decision to make on a restricted free agent, Jesper Boqvist. Brendan Bussey needs a new deal. If he's going to be the backup and Ullmark is traded, that would free up some cap space as well. Say you give Heinen $2 million, DeBrusk $6 million, Swayman $7 million. That's $15 million of your available cap space. So when I say I want to keep DeBrusk, that could come at the expense of trading elsewhere. And that's where you get into the question of whether or not they should free up more cap space by trading Linus Ullmark, and all indications are they will at least entertain that idea. So, yes, re-signing DeBrusk and Heinen limits what you're able to do in the open market, but it's kind of the devil against the unknown. And we know that DeBrusk is valuable with and without the puck. If you can bring in a playmaker to play with him, then you would get even more value out of him because perhaps you can get that more consistent offense out of a guy who has struggled to put up numbers night in and night out. So sign DeBrusk, bring in a center. It's kind of a win-win there. Or you allow DeBrusk to walk and you invest that money in a center and a scoring winger who's perhaps more consistent than DeBrusk, but maybe not as good of a two-way player. Some major decisions for Don Sweeney, and I just point back to that 2021 because he did hit on a couple. Linus Ullmark certainly has been a fantastic addition at $5 million per season. That's arguably one of his better signings in free agency, but he does have some questionable signings on his record. Foligno, Backes, don't get caught bringing in those veterans on longer deals when there's plenty of younger guys available who could complement this core. They need to add to the core, not just complement the core. Right now, your core guys are Marchand, Pasternak, McAvoy, Swayman, perhaps Lindholm, Carlo, Coyle, Zaka are like fringe core guys. It would be great to add like a franchise center to that. That's the big thing that is missing. And if not, signing DeBrusk allows you to get that. Although you could argue there is no franchise center available this year. We talked earlier this week about how Draisaitl will be available, hopefully, perhaps next summer. That's where you would love to be able to pull in. That's the guy that you would want. Yeah, some big decisions for Don Sweeney because he's not only thinking of this year, but also looking to next year and what could be available on the open market in 2025. And it's not just Leon Draisaitl who will be available. You look at some of the free agents who could become available next summer. You have Leon Draisaitl, Mikko Rantanen, Sidney Crosby, Mitch Marner, Victor Hedman, Brock Besser, Carter Verhaeghe. Next summer class is pretty good. Travis Konechny, John Tavares, Brad Marchand, of course, he will be taken care of. Nikolai Ehlers. There's some players who will hit the open market next summer that the Bruins might want to get in on. So, yeah, do you invest a ton this year? Do you leave yourself some flexibility for next year? For today's topic, who stays? I say DeBrusk, Heinen, everybody else, maybe Maroon, everybody else, given the opportunity to look elsewhere, maybe circle back if things don't work out for them in free agency. Anyways, that's it for today's episode, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do subscribe if you have not already. Locked On Boston Bruins on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. day. Take care, friends.